I'll get into this video next. It's by the same guy, Armchair Historian, who we reacted to yesterday. I feel like his content provides a lot of good material for reacting to. Just because he seems to be a pretty established, like his videos are well produced. They're these like well produced historical cartoony videos that are real popular, like the infographics videos or the oversimplified series, which might be on the infographics show. I don't remember, but either way, they're well produced and they pretty much, from what I've seen, give the establishment narrative on all of these conflicts and all of these historical events. I haven't watched this one on Korea yet. We won't be able to finish it today, but I figure we can do like a nice part one and then react to the rest of it at a different time. But yeah, we reacted to their Ukraine video before. I had a lot to say about it. I got real fired up and feisty while watching it. So that video is on our YouTube now. And this one's about the Korean War, one of the most misunderstood and even forgotten wars in American history, but one of the most deadly U.S. interventions, one of the most unprovoked U.S. interventions, where we killed 20% of this country's population, occupied half the peninsula, all to stop the spread of communism and prevent them from having self-determination and creating the kind of government that they wanted to create.
The soldiers steady themselves against the sides of a Higgins boat as another breaker pummels the landing craft. In the back, one poor man can't keep his chow down, and in the front, someone runs prayer beads through his fingers. Another salvo from the battleships. Surely nothing could have survived the bombardment. The boat's helmsman calls out, "Time to go ashore." The landing ramp collides with a concrete seawall, fragments of a ladder falling imply into the passenger bay. The Americans scramble out of the boat, scaling the concrete as their enemy opens fire. But it is not the chatter of an MG-42 that greets these United States Marines, but the slow chug of a Soviet machine gun. This is Incheon, South Korea, and like the Normandy landings barely 6 years before, this amphibious invasion will turn the tide of a war.
Surely nothing could have survived the bombardment, the soldiers thought to themselves. The heroic soldiers thought to themselves after they carpet bombed this country that never attacked them. And as the American troops went to massacre even more Koreans, they realized the Koreans had Soviet weapons to defend themselves with. Oh, those damn Soviets! They gave the Koreans weapons as their civilians were being carpet bombed and as their infrastructure was being destroyed by the U.S. empire, a country who they never attacked or had no intentions to attack. All because they overthrew the Japanese colonizers and tried to create a socialist republic. Those evil Soviets, how dare they give them weapons to defend themselves?
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. The seeds that would grow into the Korean War were sown in 1945, when the Soviet Red Army invaded the peninsula following its declaration of war on Imperial Japan, which had held Korea since 1910. Soviet forces advanced down the peninsula until they reached the 38th parallel, then halted in 1945, when the Soviet Red Army invaded the peninsula following its declaration of war on Imperial Japan.
They're calling the Korean War of Independence a Soviet invasion? I'd never even heard this before. Dude, the Soviets helped them out, and I believe China helped them out too, in overthrowing the Japanese colonizers. They were colonized, and it was like known for being an extremely brutal occupation and colonization that Japan carried out in Korea. But that's a Soviet invasion because they helped the Koreans take Korea back? Yo, liberals are wild. Duck hash browns. We don't need this. We already heard everything from Yeonmi Park. True. Thank you so much for the $50 super chat and for being a YouTube member. That's a huge contribution. But yeah, I don't know why everyone's listening to me. Just go listen to Yeonmi Park. Okay, she understands Korean history because she's from Korea. And she'll let you know that at the Korean hospitals, the people eat rats, and then the rats eat the people, and then the people eat the rats again. It's just a vicious cycle like that. So you can't get that kind of information over here at Midwestern Marks. So yeah, just go watch her. Thank you, Duck Hash Browns.
Which had held Korea since 1910. Soviet forces advanced down the peninsula until they reached the 38th parallel, then halted while the US troops landed in the south and moved to meet them, splitting the peninsula in two. The Soviets established a communist provisional government in the north, elevating Kim Il-sung, a hero of the insurgency against Japan, to the head.
The Soviets? Oh, dude, this is gross. This is a gross distortion of Korean history, of Korean culture, of a class struggle in Korea. Dude, the Americans and the Japanese had units whose whole job it was to hunt down Kim Il-sung and kill him because he was such an effective organizer, he was such an effective educator, and he was such an effective leader in battle, leading his own people in a war of independence against the Japanese colonizers. So to say that the Soviets just invaded, created a Soviet provisional government, and elevated Kim Il-sung to leadership is to totally distort history, to totally remove any kind of agency for the Korean people in their anti-colonial struggle against these people who tortured them and exploited them and robbed them of their resources and labor for years and years and years. You're just erasing that, erasing their agency, erasing their anti-colonial struggle to say that the Soviets marched in and created a communist government. So the heroic United States had to come in, kill 20% of the Korean population and save them. I haven't even seen a Korean propaganda video this bad. Usually they're not. They're at least a little bit more honest than this, at least when they're talking about the Korean struggle against the Japanese.
Of government. Consolidating power, Sung declared the formation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Espousing democratic socialism, but practicing brutal authoritarianism. With North Korea lost to communism, the Americans decided to push back by establishing the First Republic of Korea. But this state was hardly
lost to communism. They're allowed to decide what kind of government they want. It's amazing when these liberals talk about the Cold War and they talk about the US as a democracy, and then they talk about these wars that we went to stop the spread of communism. Countries are allowed to set up whatever system they want. That's what democracy is. If that's what their people decide upon, that's what they should get to do. But they say like the U.S. went to war to stop communism as if it's just a given that that's okay, right? And that's something that's good, going to spread democracy, not prevent a country from forming the kind of government that their people actually want to form.
A bastion of liberty and democracy. If you're a regular viewer, you no doubt enjoy quality historical content created with love, care, and attention to detail. That's why I'm happy to announce that this video is sponsored by the course's creator via the cited and annotated $5 a month. You'll get access to all of the content the site has to offer. At the moment, there are historical content by signing up for history courses using our affiliate link in the description below. South Korea's first experience with democracy bore a disappointing resemblance to affairs in the DPRK. When elections were held in July of 1948, US-backed candidate Syngman Rhee just barely...
No, they didn't. The DPRK government was backed by the people. And the DPRK's government had democratically elected leaders. Nobody wanted to support the South Korean government, which is why the DPRK was basically able to liberate the entire peninsula. So the US came in and carpet bombed the country and installed a fascist in the South, and then occupied the South until, they could get South Korea established as an actual country. But this was a fascist puppet dictatorship / occupation government installed by the US, whereas the DPRK was a legitimate government of the Korean people established after they overthrew the Japanese colonizers and were immediately attacked and carpet bombed by the Americans.
Made it over the threshold with an entirely unsuspicious 92.6% of the popular vote. Both Rhee's administration in the South and Sung's administration in the North wanted nothing more than to reunite the two halves of the peninsula under their respective governments, making conflict between North and South inevitable. Rhee declared his intent to reconquer the North to American envoys and followed up his statements with a Soviet-style purge of ideological opponents, including the Chechu uprising by communist elements, which led to between 30,000 and 60,000 casualties.
At least they're honest about the fact that the U.S. puppet government massacred all the communists in the South. They're honest about that, and they're honest that a conflict between the North and the South was inevitable. Because a lot of people will say the North invaded the South, right? Because the U.S. occupied the South and installed a fascist dictatorship, and then the Koreans tried to take their own country back from the Americans. They'll say that was an invasion. The North invaded the South, and that's when America got involved to protect the South. So at least this video admits that conflict was inevitable, but it's still a bunch of hogwash. And they're downplaying the number of communists killed. These will all be in the Black Book of Capitalism that I'm releasing soon.
Roughshod approach caused his American backers to limit their investment in what they saw more akin to a diet democracy than a truly free state.
A diet democracy? Dude, it's pretty widely acknowledged that it was a fascist dictatorship. Is that what you call diet democracy? Makes sense.
Even if Rhee had gotten his war, American support would have been hard to come by. The readiness of America's ground forces had dropped precipitously, and by 1950, of the 10 combat divisions in the United States Army, only one, the 82nd Airborne, was considered combat ready. All U.S. forces had also been evacuated in late 1949, leaving the South defended exclusively by the Republic of Korea Army, or ROK Army. Observing this weakness, Kim Il-sung began to believe that he could rapidly invade and conquer South Korea. Eventually, Sung launched his invasion, but claimed to his
Oh, never mind. They're going to call it an invasion. Yep. I gave this guy too much credit. I always do that.
dying day that it was a righteous
I always just hold out hope that they're honest actors for way too long.
Response to a surprise attack from the South, which was conveniently defeated so decisively by the Korean People's Army that no evidence of the invaders was left. Meanwhile, in his memoirs, Nikita Khrushchev stated, "I must stress that the war wasn't Stalin's idea, but Kim Il-sung's. Kim was the initiator. Stalin, of course, didn't try to dissuade him."
Yeah, because Kim Il-sung was never a Soviet puppet, you idiot. You just made that up. So you're shocked that, Kim Il-sung and the Korean people were leading this resistance. Yeah, they didn't want to be colonized by the Japanese. That's why they overthrew them, and that's why Kim Il-sung is a national hero, because he led that struggle and was an extremely effective organizer and fighter in that struggle. And then the U.S. tried to colonize them right after Japan. Right? So they didn't want to be colonized by them, and Kim Il-sung also led that struggle against the U.S. that killed 20% of the Korean population. Right? They're not puppets of the Soviets, so they're shocked that Khrushchev wrote this. It was Kim Il-sung's idea, not Stalin's. Yeah, none of this was Stalin's idea, dipshit. They were just giving the Koreans guns so they could defend themselves from the vicious imperialism from the West, from the capitalists.
The Korean War was a very unique kind of proxy war, where the larger US and USSR were mostly against a conflict that their clients in Korea were all too keen to initiate. And initiate they did. In the early hours of June 25th, 1950, the Korean People's Army, or KPA, crossed the 38th parallel with an armored spearhead of 150 T-34-85s, rapidly pushing the ROK Army back towards Seoul, and capturing both Kaesong and Uijeongbu. Yet despite the dire situation, it was late evening before news reached the Secretary of Defense, who begrudgingly woke up long enough to leave orders for General Douglas MacArthur to investigate rumors of a disturbance along the 38th parallel before going back to sleep. While he slumbered, the ROK Army Chief of Staff, Chae Pyong-duk, was seemingly busy doing his best to lose the war as quickly as possible. Thanks to multiple communication failures, his counterattack with the 2nd and 7th Divisions east of Uijeongbu broke down in confusion.
They didn't have any support, dude. Nobody wanted to fight for them. Think about it. The North are fighting for their country, for their sovereignty, against the American invaders. The South were just a puppet government set up by the U.S. So, like in South Vietnam, as soon as the U.S. left, the South Vietnamese government was being chased out because it had no support from the people. So how is Syngman Rhee and this South Korean puppet government supposed to defend from people who are fighting for their sovereignty and for their country? Of course they're going to lose. Of course nobody's going to want to fight for the U.S. puppet dictatorship. It's not just the communication failures in certain battles. It was the fact that these guys in the North were committed to fighting for their country and fighting for their sovereignty. And these people in the South were just fighting for a puppet government, probably being paid off to do so.
The isolated 1st Division put up fierce resistance, but with limited anti-tank weaponry, they could do little against the horde of T-34s. With retreat as the only reasonable course of action, General Che instead ordered his troops to hold fast. Soon the 1st Division was alone, fighting a doomed last stand as the static South Korean positions were systematically annihilated. President Ri then fled Seoul, and just 2 days after the invasion began, the capital fell to the KPA.
So they liberated the country within days, very similar to South Vietnam. It took days because nobody wanted to fight for the puppet government. Duh. But they'll say this is all because of the Soviets. The Soviets had such powerful tanks and they were so heavily involved. Even after the South massacred all the communists still took the entire peninsula. But the U.S. is going to come in and spread democracy. Teach these people what democracy is really about. Not having a government by the people, for the people, but having a U.S. puppet dictatorship, I guess.
General MacArthur then ordered the commander of the 8th U.S. Army, Lieutenant General Walton Walker, to prepare all available forces in the Far East and immediately dispatch them to South Korea. This turned out to be...
What do you have in that pipe, armchair historian? What are you smoking that's making you cook up these videos? Because your analysis or your view of Korean history and U.S.-Korean relations in the Korean War is clouded by something, and it might be in this pipe.
Ordered the commander of the 8th U.S. Army, Lieutenant General Walton Walker, to prepare all available forces in the Far East and immediately dispatch them to South Korea. This turned out to be a depressingly tiny force, consisting of only the 24th Infantry Division, armed with a charmingly vintage arsenal dating back from the Second World War. Even worse, only 6 transport planes were available, which could carry a single battalion. This battalion was designated Task Force Smith and was quickly launched to secure the vital port of Pusan. At dawn on July 5th, Task Force Smith engaged the KPA for the first time at the Battle of Osan, but their equipment proved useless against KPA tanks, and they were quickly overwhelmed. However, they did hold just long enough for the bulk of the 24th Infantry Division to secure Pusan. Unfortunately, all other actions the 24th participated in afterward were abject failures, and the unit eventually sustained over 6,000 casualties, including its commander. But these sacrifices bought time for the United States to mobilize its full military might.
Oh, thank God. Oh, they bought time for us to carpet bomb the country and all their civilians. To kill one person in every family of 5 with bombs. Here come the democracy planes. Like, does he not realize how disgusting this whole war, this whole invasion was throughout the process of talking about this and explaining what happened? Like, the Koreans liberated their entire country, and then the U.S. came in and bombed 20% of the population to death and flattened every building over 2 stories tall. Oh, thank goodness the U.S. did that. These soldiers were so brave for going and fighting in this country that never attacked us, that had no plans to invade us, that just wanted to set up their own kind of government and buying time so that we could carpet bomb them. Like, what the hell? How do you tell this story and still convince yourself that the U.S. are the good guys and the Soviets are the bad guys because they gave Kim Il-sung some tanks? Kim Il-sung was the democratically supported leader of this country. The U.S. was using their weapons to install a fascist dictatorship and kill 20% of the Korean people. It's a lot worse than giving the Koreans some weapons to overthrow the people who have been colonizing them.
Within days, America had established total air and naval superiority. The Korean sky constantly filled with withering bombing raids on both the invading army and North Korean infrastructure, yet Kim Il-sung refused to back down, and on August 4th, the KPA called out the assault on the perimeter around Pusan. The KPA found the Americans well dug in, and the assault morphed into a protracted battle of...
I love how it's not even the South Koreans fighting anymore. It's just the Americans. Like the South Korean fighting force fell apart that fast. So then America just landed ground troops and started a bombing campaign. And now it's just straight up the US fighting Korea for their own country. And Armchair Historian is still trying to frame it like the US is fighting for democracy or something. And the communists are evil because they're getting weapons from the Soviets.
But the perimeter came close to collapse on August 15th, when a push across the Naktung River by the KPA's elite troops managed to carve a salient known as the Naktung Bridge. Only the timely arrival of reinforcements averted disaster, all while American air and naval assets kept the North Koreans from consolidating their gains as they proceeded to devastate KPA supply lines. While the battle for Pusan raged on, General MacArthur was busy coordinating an amphibious landing at Incheon, 100 miles or 160 kilometers behind enemy lines. When told that Incheon was heavily defended and that adverse sea conditions made any landing a daunting prospect anyway, MacArthur responded thusly: "The very arguments you have made as to the impracticabilities involved will tend to ensure, for me, the element of surprise. For the North Korean commander will reason that no one would be so brash as to make such an attempt." Being so brash, MacArthur got the plan approved in late August, and to everyone's surprise, the landing at Incheon proved a massive success. This forced the KPA to pull forces away from Pusan, allowing the defenders to stage a breakout on the 25th. This was the last straw for the North Koreans, and their morale finally shattered, with hundreds of soldiers surrendering en masse as the Americans drove north, and attracted the attention of Chinese border troops at the Yalu River. With Incheon secured, UN forces began their drive to liberate Seoul. The road to Seoul.
To liberate Seoul. All right, that's enough for part one because I can't take this guy anymore. He's disgusting. To liberate Seoul from its own people? It's the Americans fighting the Koreans in Korea. Just because you divided the country in half and named, the bottom half South Korea doesn't mean that it's now supported by the people there, or doesn't mean you're liberating it by pushing the actual Korean people off their own land. It's Americans fighting Koreans in Korea. That's not liberation. That's colonization. You stooge of empire. You fucking moron. Dude, this guy is a joke. 2 million subscribers the Armchair Historian has for this garbage.